going to go ahead and record. All right, so I'm Rachel Lane. I'm Executive Director of BioAlabama. I think I know most of you on here, and am really excited to put together this panel today. There's been a couple conversations over the last couple of years that I've been a part of where it was really clear that contract-based life science SBIRs are potentially really an underexplored resource for our innovators in Alabama. And with the state matching funds that are going to become available later this year, hopefully, I wanted to make sure that our membership was as aware of this opportunity as possible and really knew who the experts are in our community that they can call on for assistance or guidance and feel confident navigating this tool. So whenever I say SBIR, I am probably, most of the information is going to be applicable to STTR also. But just to go over a couple of basics, the SBIR STTR program is federally mandated and it's available to small businesses, so businesses with less than 500 employees. Federal agencies that have an extramural R&D budget greater than $100 million are required to set aside 3.2% of that to go to SBIR awards. For the STTR program, federal agencies are only required to participate when they have an extramural R&D budget greater than $1 billion, and then they set aside 0.45% of that. So only 5 agencies are going to be participating in the STTR program for that reason. The SBIR STTR program is set up in 3 phases. 2 of those phases are funded by the federal agency. The 3rd phase is where you go out and seek external investment from VC or potentially from your end customer. Major difference between SBIR and STTR. SBIR mandates the maximum contracted effort. So the small business is still responsible for doing the majority of the effort based on the budget. They can only contract out 33% or less for phase 1 and 50% or less for phase 2. And then with an STTR, there's a minimum effort required by the nonprofit research institute, and that's 30% of the effort, and 40% is the minimum required by the small business. And today we're going to get into grants versus contracts. I think this is important because especially those of us who have an academic background are really familiar with the grant process, where we have an idea that could improve the world and then we pitch it to our agency of choice. A lot of times that's going to be the NIH or NSF. The contracts are different. DoD is one of the agencies that's really involved that we'll hear a lot from today, or a lot about today. And these are really agency-driven ideas. So the agency has an idea about what they need and what needs to be developed for their efforts. And then they'll release a solicitation that describes that product. And companies can submit their proposal about how they would resolve that problem. SBIR history in Alabama, we're actually pretty good at this. We have about 70 phase 1s. This is looking at a 5-year average, about 70 phase 1s every year and about 40 phase 2s. However, when you take away contracts, we probably have about 1/10 of that. So we're getting about 7 grants and phase 1 grants a year and about 4 phase 2 grants on average. And so you can really tell that a lot of our success is driven by more of the contract agencies. And I think a lot of this is because we have those in the state. And you think you'll hear a little bit about this today, but just like with any business relationship, maintaining that relationship is really essential to the success and the longevity of that partnership. And that's why for these contracts, it's really important that we learn, who is our customer. A lot of times it's going to be that agency, and how to have the important conversations with them that are going to drive the success of our product. I wanted to show a little bit of data that I came across recently. So this is average small SBIR STTR funding per $1 million of state GDP. And I can't point on this apparently, but if you'll see on the 4th quartile on the far right of your screen, Alabama is actually in the top 10. We do, this is kind of emphasizing my point that we do really, really well with SBIR funding, and that it's really important to our economy as a state. I also want to point out that when we look at VC per GDP, we're at the far left end. We're in the first quartile. And so this really emphasizes that our success in the SBIR program and historically has been largely driven by these contracts, where we're not looking at the public as our end customer. We're not looking for VC investment. Now, matching funds were approved this year, like I alluded to earlier, and we're still waiting on the eligibility and criteria for those. And I'm hopeful that that'll shift this narrative a little bit and will give us more opportunity in that grant area. Because with grants, because you're not working directly with your customer, it can take a little bit longer for us to go through that commercialization process and explore it and get the right people interested and engaged. But with those funds being available, I think the other part is getting more innovators into the program, whether that's contract or grant. And the contracts, because we have those agencies that are local, I think this is a resource that we need to know how to use. And we have 3 great panelists here today to tell us how they have been successful with this program. So Peggy Sammon, she is immediate past chair of BioAlabama and CEO of GeneCapture. She has successfully engaged the DoD on phase 1 and phase 2 contracts. And then Debbie Bidanset, Dr. Debbie Bidanset with SunFire Biotechnologies, recently completed her phase 1 contract with the DoD and is beginning phase 2 process. And then AJ is kind of our, he's our MVP. He has so much experience in this, really deep expertise, works with CFD Research that has, they are the experts in SBIR proposals, specifically in the grant area. They're here in Huntsville. And so just so thrilled to have AJ here. And he also has experience with both grants and contracts. And so that's one thing that I'll be sure he'll touch on today, is kind of helping understand the difference between those two. I want to pause and just find out before we get started, are there any questions from what I've said? All right, sounds good. So I'll go ahead and give all of our panelists just an opportunity to tell us a little bit about your company and about your first SBIR proposal. What was the biggest lesson that you took away from that? Peggy, will you kick us off?
Sure, I'm glad to. And nice to see everybody. I have met many of you before, a couple of new faces though. But Rachel, thanks for pulling this off. I'm with a company called GeneCapture, and we are at the Hudson Alpha Institute for Biotechnology up in Huntsville. And GeneCapture has developed a completely novel platform for doing infection detection. And now that we've all been through 1.5 years of COVID, almost everybody's aware of the PCR applications for infection detection, but we've come up with a way to look directly for an RNA signature without amplification. So it's a very interesting platform because it allows us to not require cold chain, which means that we can also get out into remote areas. And so our first STTR, our first experience on this was an STTR phase 1. And I credit AJ actually with turning us on to it. It's not something we were specifically looking for, but when we saw the requirements that the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, so DTRA, was looking for, it matched so much with what we wanted to do commercially. And I think that's going to be one of our big topics today, is that you don't want to look at the SBIR program as just a placeholder. Does it help you get where you're trying to go? And so what surprised us on that one, and what we did win it. We won the first one, and we've won several after that. That was a very important domino for us. And I'll say that my first lesson there, we got some very good advice from the Small Business Development Network. I think they had a sort of a red team, green team, little funding available for companies that were going after these, and they were able to give us some advice. But I think the biggest one was calling the technical person listed on the STTR. And we were so nervous to make that call because we didn't know if we were far enough along. Are we going to have enough preliminary data? And the reaction we got in those early days was, what, you're not using PCR, it'll never work. You know, so we just didn't want to blow it at the beginning. But that, my big advice to all of you is, these people actually love to take calls from small businesses. They like to hear about what's going on, and they are generally quite helpful. So that was my first big lesson.
Thanks so much, Peggy. I'm going to let Debbie go next. You tell us about your company and about your first SBIR.
Hey everybody, it's good to meet y'all. I know a few of these faces here. SunFire is a fairly new company in the Innovation Depot in Birmingham. We started operations in January of 2020. Our company was created mainly as a contract research organization to help support large pharma in their development of vaccines. We perform a functional antibody assay that helps companies determine the efficacy of their vaccines. And we started with the pneumococcal vaccine. One of our major founders is the discoverer, creator of those assays. So being new on the scene, we were rather surprised to see a solicitation for something that was right in our sweet spot, and that was developing another functional antibody assay for Shigella for the Department of Defense. And so we applied for it, and we did get it. One of the big lessons for us was realizing that, you know, our founders, the founders of the company were very familiar with the grant process and everything else. And I think our biggest lesson was doing that transition to the contract side of things, where, you know, every detail has to be, you know, validated and verified with the DoD. Every budget detail, everything, you know, the reporting process is, you know, very specific formats. So it was a lesson learned for us that everything was very specific. Like Peggy, you know, the one thing is that, you know, this was a solicitation that was in our sweet spot and could expand our commercial offerings. So
Thanks so much, Debbie. All right, AJ.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is AJ Singhal. I am with CFD Research Corporation, and I'm leading the drug discovery group here at CFD. And so I've been over here for about 5 years, and CFD is a really kind of unique, diverse company. As Rachel mentioned, we've won quite a few SBIRs in a lot of different areas. And one of the reasons for that is because most of our SBIRs have been contracts where NASA or DoD has been the end customer. And so we continue to kind of develop new solutions for their needs. And so that's made it kind of a continuous effort for several groups here to keep writing SBIRs to solve different problems for the government. For instance, I think in the late 80s, we helped solve the Challenger. After the Challenger shuttle exploded, we helped work on that issue with the fuel leakage, and it was a fluid dynamics issue. And I believe we won that contract through an SBIR and helped work on that. So part of our company does that kind of work. I'm doing drug discovery, which is quite a bit different, but I did get started with a contract SBIR through DoD. And I was actually at iExpress Genes with Peggy. It was my former company. And so I found, it wasn't my first proposal. The first one I wrote, I think, was NSF, and it did not do well. And one thing I love about DoD, and I haven't written for NASA, but I imagine they might be the same way, is they really reward innovation, I feel like. They'll take a risk, and they don't always require so much preliminary data like NIH and some of the other agencies. So I came in with just a really kind of crazy, innovative idea for new antibiotics. It was something I wanted to get into, was discovering new antibiotics. And we did reach out to the technical contact, as Peggy mentioned, and it just happened to be, you know, a good fit. They were interested in our idea, and I didn't have any data whatsoever really behind it. And we were able to win this very competitive SBIR. I think there were 3 winners. And then we got good results. And so we were able to grow it from there. And we moved that technology over here to CFD Research. And so I've been going strong ever since.
Great. Thank you so much, AJ. I'm going to actually let you kind of take off with the first question and kind of give us some insight into the grant versus contract process, or just general experiences. How do you choose which one's right for you? What's some of the learning curve in a contract versus a grant? Whatever you think is the most important to highlight between those two.
Yeah, so the main experience I have with the grants are NIH and NSF. And one of the big differences I see is that with NIH and NSF grants, you have a very broad topic. Like the topic will be, for instance, in my field, it'll be new antibiotics. It's like just make a new antibiotic. That's the topic. So then it's really just wide open as far as how you're going to do it, what you're going to go after. And it's a different kind of right, because you have this wide openness, but then that means you have to really convince the reviewer that it's worthwhile. You have to convince them that, hey, this really needs to be done. Whereas with the contract solicitations from DoD, NASA, and actually, you guys may not be aware, NIH also has contract solicitations for SBIR. They're all super specific, like very specific. Like there's one I'm looking at right now for DoD where they want new antibiotics, but they want them to be a photo activated something or the other type of molecule that works on the skin at this depth. And it's like super duper specific. So you don't have to convince them of the need at all, because they already know the need is there and they want it. You really are more focused on convincing them of the innovation that it's going to work. Whereas NIH and NSF, you got to convince them of a lot of stuff, the need and the innovation. And a lot of times they want preliminary data from my experience, the grants. But from a administrative standpoint, the way you get the money is different. With a grant, I don't understand all of it, but I think you get a lot of it up front. Whereas with a contract, you bill it monthly in different ways. And the proposal styles are a little bit different too. DoD and NASA are, I would say they're longer, but it's really just a different format. The formatting is a little bit different and the sections are a little bit different. So, yeah.
Debbie, do you have anything to add? I know you were talking about getting some of your leadership. They were really familiar with the grant process, and then coming over to the contract. Any lessons learned from that? Debbie, any thoughts on that?
Sorry, Rachel, I couldn't hear if you said Debbie or Peggy.
I said Debbie. Yeah, it's okay. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I thought you had said Peggy. Okay.
Oh, it's clearly my issue with enunciation.
All right. Repeat that question for me, please.
I was just curious. So AJ was talking about the grants versus contract. And so I know you had said that your leadership of the company was familiar with the grant process. And so I was just curious if you could talk at all about some of the challenges in switching from a grant kind of protocol to a contract application.
Well, and as I said, I mean, everything has very specific formats, and they require very specific information. I mean, every item on your budget needs to be validated and verified. You got to show screenshots and all that fun stuff, and you got to, kind of validate your use of all, just literally every item on your budget. Your reports, as I said, are very specific formats. For monthly reports and final reports have another format, and I know that with the granting procedures, monthly reports were unheard of, but even with a 6-month contract, they want a monthly report with a specific format. So yeah, it was a bit of an adjustment from my grant people to move over to this process and have to be very, very aware of all the details, essentially.
But it's doable. It was done.
It is doable. Yes.
It's definitely doable. And I'll say that one thing about all that justification that's needed, and the contracting folks you're talking to are like, this is taxpayer dollars. We got to have it all figured out. But one of the tough things is you apply for these proposals long before you get them. And by the time you get them, things have changed. You may not want to work with that supplier. You may not want that vendor. You might have a different person in a role. So there is sort of like a second bite at the apple when you get the contract to say, here's a few things that are different. And then even still, there's changes that you're going to want to make. So since I don't have the experience with the grants, I'm a little envious of that, sort of room to breathe a little bit, but I definitely appreciate why they want the detail that they want. It's, it's a bit of a hassle, but it's not, it's great funding.
Great. So I think I'd like to actually, Peggy, pick up with you on, you were talking about calling that technical person on the solicitation. Curious what best practices you've kind of fallen into or discovered. And then also, have you ever been able to influence a solicitation, have a solicitation specifically written for your technology? I know that that's a possibility, but I haven't met anyone who's had success with that.
I dream about that.
Okay.
It hasn't happened yet for me. But yes, I'd say that, like I was saying before, we were pretty nervous about making that first call. Once you get the contract or the grant, that person that you're dealing with, your technical point of contact and your contracting point of contact, we've gone out of our way to have a really good relationship with them. We send them updates. We tell them when something great's happened at the company. We just try to build that rapport. During COVID times, of course, it's all virtual, and sometimes it's a real challenge to do a video call with someone at the government. But before COVID, anytime that we were in the DC area, we would stop by, see these people. The relationship is really critical. So there's two parts of this. One is getting that first one, that first domino. Then once you've got it, you want to really build that up. So there's one thing I'd say, Rachel, that, a sequential phase 2, which is sort of like a second phase 2. In that one, yes, we really did have a lot of influence, and we sort of knew that as long as we were responsive on the proposal and that we had the performance data from the phase 2, we knew that our shot of getting it was very good. But I wouldn't say that the whole program was written for us. But like AJ was saying, if it's NASA or DOD, they have what they're calling a capability gap. They've got something that is a problem. And they go out to their whole team saying, what problems do you wish there was a solution for? And then those solutions get thrown out to big companies and small companies. So they're really looking for a clever solution. And that is, that's kind of a better sales position to be in than to have to sort of build your reference around an idea from the very beginning. So yes, relationship, I think very critical. And we've really enjoyed the people we've gotten to know. A lot of people will roll their eyes about the bureaucracy at the government. These people are basically very interested in what we're doing. I have been quite impressed with the educational background of the assistants to the technical point of contact and to the contract folks. A lot of them in our field, a lot of them have had advanced biology degrees. They've had industry experience that is very relevant. So they're actually great people to connect with.
Sound like really interesting conversations. AJ, do you have anything to add, and especially kind of on maintaining that relationship with the technical?
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's all about the relationship. So we're working on still that same SBIR where we're developing new antibiotics. And so DOD or DTRA, the agency we're working with, they're interested in new antibiotics against anthrax and some of these biological warfare agents. And so we just, we stay connected with them, and we present to different leadership there. And then we start to understand what they're looking for and what their problem is. And so there's a big problem with drug resistance, just like with the bacteria we face in the hospital, that can also happen with these, with anthrax and these other bacteria. And so they are interested in combining antibiotics. They've talked to us about that. They had a conference about it, actually. And so then through talking with them, I can suggest that, hey, why don't we do an SBIR, topic on combining antibiotics? So you can get some applications along those lines. And then, that gives me, I guess you could say I have some influence then, but I still have to compete. I'm still going to submit a proposal, and it's going to be fair and square open competition. But we have lots of people here at our company who have developed these relationships and just understanding of the customer and the government and trying to help them get what they want. They end up influencing the topic, or helping shape the topic. And actually, I think DARPA and a few agencies actually have a website where you can submit topics or things that you would like them to put a topic on. And so that's totally something that's possible, I would say.
Good deal. Yeah, cautionary tale, I guess. I did go to an SBIR training in Florida one year, and whoever was running it was telling this story. Yes, you can influence solicitations, but you still have to take the application seriously. And the client he had been working with, had a solicitation written specifically for his project, and then just kind of, threw in an application for it, kind of figuring that he would get it, and he ended up not. So really missed opportunity there. So, it's still, even if you have a solicitation written based on the technology that you're wanting to work on, the agency still accepts, I think, usually around 3 different proposals. Is there a hard number there? I cannot remember.
Not a hard number, but
okay,
2 to 3, I would say, for DoD. For NASA,
Yeah.
I don't know. For NIH, it depends on each topic. They'll tell you how many they're going to award, actually, for NIH. But they'll get probably 20 or so easily applications, I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're still going to have, you're going to have plenty of competition in the application part. And then also, they want to put bets on multiple horses. So, your technology hopefully will be successful, but if it's not, then they also have, another group that's developing a different approach.
Rachel,
Go ahead.
we've also had, a fairly good relationship with our technical contact. Years ago, actually, our technical contact and our co-founders actually started doing some of the basic research and developing some of the basic parts of the assay that he then decided to release the topic on. And, obviously we were probably one of the prime candidates to get it. So there was already a preceding relationship with our technical contact. But I think the other thing, what we have found is that even though we know our technical contact and we've known him for years, we are kind of very cautionary in dealing with him as we, like when we were applying, we just sent in our submission for the phase 2 application for this project. We were very, cautious about how to talk to him, because he is one of the people that judges these applications and such. So, I would say, yes, we need to foster that relationship with our technical contact. We also got to realize who that person is and their role in this process.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good comment. Thanks for adding that, Debbie.
And there's a lot of different personalities, I would say, too. I think Peggy can vouch for that. There's a lot of different personalities out there, and they approach the relationships differently. Some of them are very, very strict about, how they'll talk to you, and some of them are much more open and comfortable. So you kind of got to gauge that. And
that's kind of interesting. This is, as you're talking, I'm thinking about how in the grant process, a lot of the PIs are really evaluated based on their publication history. That's a really big factor in that review. How, maybe does your publication history play a part in contracts?
I would say yes, it does, but you make a good point. It's definitely much more important in the academic grant application. It's almost essential, I think, to winning an academic grant. For SBIR, you can get by without it if you have good collaborators. That can help a lot, having consultants and collaborators with strong publications. Also patents help, and just prior work of your company, I think, can help.
I think that's an area that we felt vulnerable on. Although some of our scientists have a publication history, when it comes to GeneCapture, we did not want to put a lot of public data out. So we do have patents, and we let them know the patents, but we felt concerned. And I think especially with NIH, I think NIH has is just not as risk they're just not as risky. They want to know this has been through before. And I think it's frustrating because it is in small business innovative research, but I think for NIH, they kind of want to know that everything is likely to work out.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of been my experience as well, that the publication history is very important, even in the SBIR process through the NIH or HHS agency, and that it, you know, with NSF, it's not something that we care. I do review proposals with NSF, and we do not look at publication history. We will look at CV and just make sure that the person looks like they can actually do what they say they're going to do, and that the team it looks strong and has complementary expertise. But again, those are grants, not contracts. And so I think kind of what I was thinking about there is that by maintaining that relationship and making sure that you're having those conversations with the technical representative from the agency, you know, that's kind of like the mushy part, the squishy part of that your publication history can take care of with some of your more grant-based awards, where people can look and see, okay, we feel like this person is competent based on their publication history and that they can do the research that they're proposing. Whereas a lot of that comes out, I think, in those conversations with the project manager at the agency for these contracts. Would y'all agree with that, or has your experience been a little different?
I would agree with it, but it does remind me of how important the bio sketches are and the little mini bios that go into some of these contracts. Those are really, really important. And I've been told by some reviewers that they see these bio sketches that have not been updated, and they're just sort of thrown in templates. And they are really looking for, why do you want to be part of this project? What are you bringing to it? And a really well-written bio sketch can overcome, you know, a gap in publications.
Yeah. Great. All right, so I'm going to move on a little bit. Debbie, this one's for you. So you're moving from phase 1 to phase 2. Since that's really fresh on your plate, can you just provide a little bit of insight on, what that process was like? You finished phase 1, and then are you invited to phase 2? Do you have to submit an application for phase 2? Can you talk about that transition?
Well, with our program, pretty much if you got awarded the phase 1, you were invited to submit a phase 2. So yes, we were invited to submit the phase 2. As far as considerations is concerned, I think I have to go back to what Peggy said earlier. You know, the first one is a 6-month contract. The second one is a 2-year contract. And so, in putting together your very specific budget for that 2-year contract, you don't know what's going to happen to your supply chain and everything else, what the cost of the supplies is going to do and all that fun stuff. So you really have to pay attention to, kind of guessing what's going to happen in the future. So yeah, I think that was a major consideration, and that we spent a lot of time trying to figure out, year 1 might not have been that difficult to figure out, but year 2 is really this, open area that we kind of had to fill in with estimates and guesstimates, left and right. So, that was probably the hardest part, is, the guessing game that we had to play.
Sounds good. Anything you would add, AJ or Peggy?
I agree.
Okay.
One thing I might add, just when you're looking at a phase 2, a lot of times you can find out who your competition is. You can do some Googling, and you can see what other companies won a phase 1. And most of the agencies will only award 1 phase 2. There are a few that will give a couple of phase 2s if they're really good proposals, but a lot of them will only give 1. So you're competing usually with 2 other companies. So sometimes you can do some research on who else you're going against and get some ideas that way. Or you can at least see the title and maybe the abstract of their phase 1. And that could be helpful.
That's really great advice. I'm going to to jump on to IP rights, just want to make sure that we address this because I know that sometimes this is a rate limiting concern for people wanting to enter into the SBIR program. Can you talk a little bit about, I think the concern is march-in rights are sometimes discussed as a hesitation. What made you feel comfortable with knowing that your IP would be yours?
I'll start in on that one, and we've got Nick on the line here, who's a great expert on this. But I was concerned about taking in government funding and making our intellectual property portfolio muddied somehow. And I really was very comforted by the fact that if it's an SBIR and STTR, if you're under that umbrella, any patents that you have before you take this contract are completely yours. Any IP that's developed during the funding stream, the IP still goes to the company. The government has, of course, a license to use that technology. They don't want to find out 10 years later that you're going to charge them a license to do something that they helped fund. It doesn't mean they're getting it for free. They're still going to pay. It's just not a license. And so I actually felt very comfortable. I did have several of our shareholders a little bit concerned, and we were very confident in the IP position. And there's a lot of paperwork. Debbie talks about the specifics. This is one to really take seriously, but there's a lot of paperwork ahead of time where you say, these are the rights I'm asserting that we already have. These are the rights that we're asserting for anything that comes out of this contract going forward. And I have definitely gotten some legal advice on that wording. It is something to take seriously, but it's, there's small companies would not even participate in this kind of work if you couldn't keep the patents. That's what we need to become a successful company. Or it doesn't have to be a patent, but a trade secret or IP. So sometimes, I've seen in a few SBIR conferences, they'll make it look like the government is being so generous. Oh yes, and you get to keep the patents. Well, that's what they have to do to get small businesses interested to even participate. So it's a must-have.
Thanks, Peggy. Debbie, you have anything to add to that?
No, not really. I mean, I'm a veteran of the Technology Commercialization Office at UAB, worked there for 15 years and was very, very, very aware of government rights and government funded inventions. And so, no, that's never been a concern for me.
What about you, AJ?
The only thing I would add is just to say that they really want you to succeed as a small business. The SBIR program's goal is to help the small business, and they're really measured by how much money you make, off of these products. So they're there to help you succeed, and that's what they want. So.
Yeah, I think understanding the historical context for why this program was established too. It's established in the 70s, and the U.S. government, we wanted to make sure that we were remaining competitive. And so, like you're saying, AJ, it's really important to them that we have that small businesses have the incentive to continue innovating and moving forward. And our IP, that is absolutely central to that. So, Nick, did you have anything you wanted to add on this topic since we have you here?
I'll just throw in a couple of things. Back to your first comment about worries about march-in rights. March-in rights are much overblown in the popular press. If march-in rights are asserted by the government, then the patent holder has a right to due process, and it's only supposed to occur under very certain circumstances. So that's not really a concern. The license to the government shouldn't be that much of a concern. It only comes up under circumstances where a inexperienced contractor wants to invent something and supply that thing to the government once it's been invented. You can't necessarily rely on your patent to make you a sole source in that case, because the government has the right to practice your invention or have it practiced on their behalf by somebody else. So just if you're thinking about getting into government contracting, and the Army wants you to invent a new boot, just realize that you may invent the new boot, and it might be profitable to do that, but you won't necessarily be the one supplying all of our infantry with boots in that case, at least not by virtue of the patent.
Great, thank you so much, Nick. We have about 15 minutes left. So I wanted to, well, actually, I did want to go ahead and follow up on sole source opportunity. AJ or Peggy, would y'all, since y'all have gone all the way through phase 1, phase 2, would you talk a little bit about that?
I'll start, AJ. Just say that it's a really great privilege that when you are awarded in many cases a phase 1, but certainly a phase 2, the government then has the right, maybe it's years later, maybe it's months later, but when your product is ready, the government has the right to sole source that product because you've already been through this technical validation and this competitive selection. So not everybody can take advantage of this, but depending on what your business plan is, it's a terrific privilege to be able to do sole sourcing in the future. So it's one more feather in your cap to have won an SBIR phase 2 or STTR.
AJ, anything?
Yeah, I don't know if I have too much to add. I feel like Nick also just kind of touched on it. I mean, our goal for our antibiotics project, since we're developing antibiotics against, say, anthrax, I mean, that's not going to be used by the general public, obviously. So we would like to supply that, that drug to the government. And of course, we'll have to do it at a reasonable price, which I think is where, that they might have the opportunity to go elsewhere. But as long as we keep the price, reasonable, I think we would have a good chance at supplying that, So that's about all I got.
Okay, great. Debbie, anything to add?
No.
Okay, sounds good. Well, then I'd like to use the last 15 minutes here to answer any questions from the audience. Kevin, I'll call you out if we don't have any. You've been so nice to keep your camera on the whole time, and I always like to acknowledge and appreciate the people who did that. Do you have any specific questions today?
Well, I think so. I've noticed that it's a little bit difficult to, it's really interesting, AJ, you mentioned NASA and DoD, SBIR contracts. It's interesting. I've had more success finding awardees and the topic of their SBIR grants. And even I've found a few SBI contract awardees, but I've had a more difficult time finding the opportunities while they're still available. So I've looked for contracts, and I've even called the persons who posted the contracts, and sometimes the contracts are old and they've already had, they've already met their needs, so on and so forth. So I guess something is missing in my research on finding available contracts, especially SBIR contracts, especially, and for some of those agencies, because I'm mainly used to the biomedical NIH, especially a little bit of NSF, but I think I need to brush up, maybe be tutored, schooled a little bit on finding the current topics, current available contracts.
Yeah, it definitely can be tricky. There's so much information out there, and maybe we can put together some kind of list of links or something. Maybe BioAlabama can do that just as a resource. But DoD, they just dropped a new round yesterday, actually, of solicitation due in October. NIH has one due in October for contracts. There's a lot of topics in the NIH contract solicitation. NASA is just once a year, but everybody has them. I mean, even DOE and USDA, they have SBIR also, and there's some bio stuff in there. I don't know too much about whether they're contracts or grants or not from USDA and DOE, but yeah, if you just do some Googling, or maybe we can make a list of links or something. There may be some central resource. I haven't found it. Our company has been doing this forever. So they just email us the links as soon as they come out. So I've gotten kind of spoiled over here at CFD Research. But yeah, it can definitely be tricky. So DoD SBIR has all the DoD topics. So if you just Google DoD SBIR, you'll get to a page and it has them all, the open ones. So.
Okay. It'll parse out the contracts.
The DoD SBIRs are all contracts, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. And they're very specific topics, like I was saying, very, very specific.
Are they?
One thing that helped us, and I don't know how to get you on this list, Kevin, but it definitely helped our company, is that on an early STTR phase 1 that we put in, we got a letter of support from Lockheed Martin because it was a technology that they said was of interest. They weren't part of the proposal, they weren't a collaborator, but just a letter of support. And somehow that got us on their list. And so twice a year, I'll get the list of SBIR topics that they have an interest in. So it's nicely curated because it's already gone through their filter. And I wonder if that's a great idea, AJ, actually coming up with some kind of a link that maybe BioAlabama could put out an announcement saying new SBIRs out today from DoD or from others. That'd be a really helpful process. It is hard to find them.
I always recommend the BBC Entrepreneurial Training Center as a good resource. Their newsletter, and then they also on LinkedIn will announce whenever the new solicitations drop for most of the agencies, I think. So I would follow them.
And I think most of the agencies have a sign up where you can give them your email address and then you'll automatically get email when the new ones come out. I know DoD has that for sure.
NSF and NIH are a little bit more rhythmic, or are definitely rhythmic. And then I think the DoD is twice a year too, or is it
Three times
a year? Yeah, 3 times a year. So once you get the dates, you'll be able to predict it in the future.
You know, and I'll say that these proposals are a big investment in time. It's a lot of work. I guess in a lot of ways, a manuscript is something similar, but these proposals are tough. You get emotionally, committed and engaged in it. And so it is just it's very disappointing when you don't get one. But I think if you look at it as a great discipline for condensing your thoughts and your plan and what's your commercial focus, it's a good discipline either way, but these are not easy to get. It's quite an accomplishment when you do, and it looks like a lot of people on this call have been through it before. So, that's a great setup. It's a big deal. And one other thing I was going to say that I like about the contract side of it is I just like having a customer. So in a company like GeneCapture, where we're developing a new medical device and we're going to need FDA clearance before we can be fully commercial, it is so helpful for our development team to have the discipline of a monthly report, or in our case, I think it's a quarterly reports, and the detail of your experimental plan versus what your results were. I mean, that is so helpful. It's so helpful to have someone in particular that you can focus the whole company on saying, this is what we said we would deliver. And I also just wanted to mention, Rachel, that, we have not tried to absolutely cover all expenses on these SBIRs. When you're building a company and you've got a commercial plan, you've got other funding that you need to be looking at, other private funding. And so in a lot of ways, I think especially early on, you probably do have to overpromise a little bit and then deliver. So it's tough, but it's, the competition is no small thing. What AJ was saying before, you might be able to find out who your competition is after you win one of these, but there's a lot of people trying to get them. And so you really do have to put your best foot forward. And I think just going into it, your chances are not high at the very beginning, but once you develop your relationship, they get better, and you just don't want it to be the one thing you're counting on.
Yeah, one thing to add about losing, because they are hard to win. One of the nice things about the grants that with like NIH is that the topics are so broad, they're always there. So, if you lose, which hardly anybody wins on the first time with NIH. They're very, very tough. It took me many submissions, and each time I can take that proposal and take the feedback and modify it and submit it again. And you can do that as many times as you want pretty much for NIH, and I'm not sure about NSF, but with the DoD contracts, the topics usually come and go, unfortunately. So if you write it and you lose, you probably won't get that same topic again to reuse that proposal, but you might get something similar to where you could tweak it and learn from what happened on that one.
Great advice. All right, any more questions? Rita, I see y'all have one. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a question. So I've basically just finished college. One of the things that we talked about earlier was how strong your publication history needs to be. For somebody like myself who I do have a publication history, but it's pretty short and probably not all that impressive. Is it even remotely viable for somebody like me to be the PI on one of these contracts or SBIR grants? Or do I really, really need to consider bringing somebody on our team to be the PI who has a much stronger history?
Do you have a bachelor's degree or master's or?
I finished my undergraduate degree in biochemistry, and I'm currently in MBA school.
Oh,
I may
okay.
go to school in the future for biological sciences as well, for a master's or PhD as
Right.
well, but right now.
I don't think officially you have to have a graduate degree. From what I've read, I only have a master's degree, I will say. A lot of people think you have to have a PhD to be a PI, and that's not the case. I don't know, it kind of depends on what you're doing. With NIH, I think it'll be very tough, to be honest. With DoD or something, it may be possible.
We're
What do y'all
currently
think?
applying for a NSF SBIR. So just
Maybe Rachel might know more. She's worked with NSF.
Yeah, definitely don't need a PhD with NSF. That's one thing that I really do love about the NSF is they're trying to prepare their companies to go out and ask for third-party funding. And so the NSF is going to be really intentional about looking at your team and making sure that you have all of the expertise. But like I said, your publication history is not a part of our evaluation process.
Okay.
Making sure your technology is protected will be, but your publication history.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And you might also want to just surround yourself with some advisors who have some good credentials that you can say they're advising you. But if it's a proposal that's going to lead to a commercial project, the fact that you're in MBA school is going to be helpful. I would definitely echo NIH, tough, but others, I think, a little more open to it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
I have a question that's similar to what Kevin said of it's hard to find solicitations that we're a good match for. And so I also don't know a technical contact to really reach out to and try to start forming a relationship with. So I just look for similar technical contacts and reach out to them coldly, or like, how does this work?
For NSF, or go ahead, AJ.
Oh, no,
I was
no,
gonna
we're just
say,
interested in like DoD contract grants now as well.
yeah, so that's the tricky thing with DoD. Sometimes there's just nothing that lines up, to be honest. And they don't have a ton of bio solicitations. If you've looked at DoD solicitations, most of them are engineering and simulations and things like that. So if there's nothing that matches, you could still reach out to technical contacts just through doing some research on the different websites, I guess, of DoD, different agencies, and see who has interests maybe that are similar to yours. And then you can reach out to them and just start a discussion, I would say. And maybe you can find somewhere where your interests meet with their needs, and then maybe they can put a topic out. That would be the thing I could think of. But NIH and some of the other agencies have much more broader topics where you can almost fit anything into them if you have a good idea. So.
Yeah.
And I think being prepared to do a cold call is great. Maybe here's a case where it's not the technical point of contact, but maybe call the SBIR office for, Defense Threat Reduction Agency or Army or whatever. Actually call into that office and tell them what you're working on, and is there anybody on the team that they know of who's working on this. And some of them are just going to say, nope, I haven't heard anything about it, but some will be helpful. I think that'd be a perfectly fine cold call to make.
Thank you.
I know Kevin had a question.
I was going to say, Reva, if you are just basically getting started, I don't know if you've heard of the administrative supplement opportunity. That's a good way to get a formal collaborator, and get some funding and work on a project or in an area of your expertise or interest with an SBIR awardee. So I don't know if you've heard of that program, but you could check it out. It'd probably be good since sounds like you're just starting.
Thank you. I'll look into that.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of that either, Kevin. Thanks for bringing that up. I'll if you want to if you can send me a link to it, or I'll try Googling it also, and then I'll try to send it out in like a summary email after we disperse. We have 2 more minutes. I'm willing to let one person try to get a question in if they have it. Going once, going twice. All right, thank you all for showing up today, asking your questions. Thank you to our panelists. I know y'all are all very busy, and just really appreciate you sharing your experience and expertise with us. I think this has been a great discussion. I learned a lot, and it was really fun just to hear everyone exchange ideas. So thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Liz.